Place Australia acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to lands, waters, skies and communities. We pay our deepest respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
At our pit stop program, you'll walk through the door and it'll be a hub of busyness, controlled chaos, but there might be young people welding in the welding station. There's always young people in the back room working on bikes.
Hi, I'm in Year 8 and I do the pit stop program every Wednesday. What I usually do at pit stop on a Wednesday is painting, working on cars or bikes.
We'll have a car that's up on the hoist. The kids will be working on that vehicle, learning how to check the brakes, check the oil, change a battery, change a car tyre.
Sometimes we do woodwork, then right now we're doing bikes, fixing bikes and donating them.
The cars that we work on out there are also given back to community. So I think we've given out maybe 10 cars, 11 cars now back to our community.
I'm James, I'm the coordinator here out at Pit Stop. We see, say from the start of a term, kids that don't want to communicate or very shut down, or that's the feedback from their educators, that they're not talking or doing anything at school, to within 3 or 4 weeks they'll come out of their shell and their confidence grows, and we sort of then lean on them, push them a bit harder for new skills and go from there.
It's a hub of activity, and I think the pride that young people have in completing something that they're proud of is amazing.
I was working against bikes, I was doing wood, and I did everything. I was so good at it. What I'm proud of is that last year I did an entire table, and everybody was so shocked when they saw it.
The sound of tools, the smell of metal. Young people in Shepparton, in regional Victoria, getting their hands dirty, fixing cars and bikes, and learning to weld. This is Pit Stop, one of the programs run by the Greater Shepparton Lighthouse Project.
So I'm Amy Robinson. I'm the Executive Officer of Greater Shepparton Lighthouse Project, and we are a place-based collective impact organisation that's been working to improve outcomes for young kids from conception to career in the Greater Shepparton community for about 12 years now.
Pit Stop is improving outcomes on the career end of the spectrum, and the idea for it came out of a process. Every few years, Lighthouse goes into the Greater Shepparton community and listens. They do what's called 1,000 conversations. It is basically what it says on the box. They speak to 1,000 people, a genuine cross-section of the community, to find out what's needed.
After our 2018 1,000 conversations, I had a community leadership table that I was leading at the time, made up of people who worked in the justice system. They might have been wellbeing leaders from alternate education sites, principals of local high schools, and they're all saying the biggest challenge we have at the moment is young people who are struggling with their attendance and engagement in school, and that they needed another option. So as a result, we as a community, with a $20,000 donation from a local business person, we co-designed with young people and with the services and with educators a program to address that called Pit Stop. So it's a hands-on learning space led by an amazing team and a huge volunteer component as well, where young people can come in and get those basic skills to better set them up for the world of work. So such a really tangible solution, one that we wouldn't have come up with, but one that we heard strongly through the conversations.
I'm Brooke Boney, a proud Gamilaroi woman and journalist with a background in public policy. From partnerships for local action and community empowerment, this is Making Place Matter, a podcast where we ask who decides. Today's episode is about the how of shared decision making, the structures, the processes, and the conditions that make it possible. So you'll hear how 3 organisations approach the shared decision-making process from very different vantage points. The Greater Lighthouse Project in regional Victoria, a state-level disaster authority in Queensland, and a philanthropic foundation working on some of Australia's most entrenched challenges. Amy Robinson says the Greater Shepparton Lighthouse project started back in 2013.
Around that time, Greater Shepparton had really poor outcomes for our young people. So we had poor Year 12 completion rates. We had high numbers of young people that were interacting with the justice system. Our teen pregnancy rate was nearly double the Victorian state average at the time. There were employers in the town that said, we can't find our next apprentice, but yet we're seeing all these kids around town on street corners when they should be in school, or they could be transitioning into the workforce. And there's obviously so much investment in services in the town, but yet we're not shifting the dial.
The first 1,000 conversations came soon after as a way to engage with the community on possible solutions to those challenges. Listening is only part of the equation. To actually shift the dial, someone has to hold the process together. That's where a backbone organisation like Lighthouse comes in. They can run programs to help those challenges and use those programs to tap into other silos.
When Lighthouse first formed, two of our key initiatives that started were a direct result of what we heard in 1,000 conversations. So young people were saying, we need a space where we can connect with positive mentors and role models. We need a space where we can feel safe and included and heard.
Oh yeah, and you're like going from side to side, but it's also like...
So we started the Youth Haven in response, and the Youth Haven is now called our OLLY, Opportunities and Life Links for Youth, and it still runs strong. We also started our Family Haven in Mooroopna. And again, it was addressing what we heard, that families just needed sort of a safe space and an open door to walk through and just be heard. And it might be about connection, just being with other parents, sharing similar circumstances, about having their basic needs met, getting food, early intervention, so referrals to services, whether that be for housing or addressing domestic violence issues that might be present, or addressing whether there was an early sort of additional learning need that wasn't being met, where their young child might need some additional support.
Lighthouse's most recent 1,000 conversations happened in 2024. Not content to wait to engage every few years, Amy says they've created more immediate ways to speak with the community.
So we came up with a concept around a bit more informal, and how do we have like a pizza party kind of theme for our younger people in particular. And so pizza's on, and come and grab a slice and have your say. And really it's about prioritising what we heard out of the last 1,000 conversations, but also there's amazing graphic posters up on the wall, and there's some empty slices so that young people can, put up what are the other pieces of this pizza, what are the other challenges or social issues or things that are really important to them that they would like to see addressed in the Greater Shep community. So that's been a really fun and informal way of continuing the conversation in between that big consultation that's so important.
That's so interesting. How do you manage when there are different perspectives, like different conflicting perspectives in the community?
We have a really diverse community, and it's such a strength of this region. Greater Shepparton has the largest First Nations population outside of Melbourne, nearly 4% reported First Nations population residing in the area, and we also have, I think it's nearly 18% of our residents are born overseas. So, we put our, young people and lived experience at the centre of our decision making. So, it is, it can be messy. Like it's not an easy journey, but the outcomes are so much richer when you take on those multiple perspectives, and you can never sort of jump to solution mode and think you have the answers. And I think that's the strength that a backbone brings. You know, when you're talking about creating systems change across, you know, justice, education, the health sector, we're talking about working across systems. And I think there's an element of we're not an expert in those systems. We're an expert of listening to our people. So I think there's something really powerful in just acknowledging that, yeah, people, they know their own lives. They know what they need. They really just need to be asked.
Amy says Lighthouse has processes to allow everyone to have their say. They keep the groups for 1,000 conversations small. They also give people the option to respond in writing if they're not comfortable talking. Following this period of consultation, Lighthouse continues to work with the community to understand whether their efforts are actually driving the change they want to see.
And feeding back what we've heard to community, because this is their information, this is their data. So I think another key thing, 1,000 conversations is one thing we do, but we have regular check-in mechanisms really through all of our evaluation processes. So we've worked with Social Ventures Australia to embed a social return on investment methodology within the way we capture and monitor the change that's occurring, or, you know, to pick up those continuous improvements in real time. And so through that process, we have surveys that we conduct with 95% of the people we speak to are the people in our programs or that attend our youth haven or our family haven, or they might be volunteering in our primary schools. So having that information enables us to sort of tweak and be agile and make changes where they're needed.
There are formal mechanisms, surveys, data, and then there are moments that just can't be captured formally. An unprompted voicemail, someone picking up the phone just to say, you've made a difference.
I was listening to a voice message just last week of a mother who attends our family haven, and she was leaving this message for the coordinator saying, my son now is getting the support he needs. He's engaged in school. My life is so much better now. I'm connected. Not only am I happier and healthier and we're now on the right track, but I'm able to provide support to others, and I'm telling them about your family haven. So the ripple effects of what happens when you listen to community, empower community, they're part of their own solution, and the ripple effects are real when they're helping others. We're looking for intergenerational change, so we're building capacity of our families, and it's going to be long term. And some of our young people might have touch points with Lighthouse. It might be that the mother and the young one are attending the family haven. The older brother is getting some mentoring for his maths homework and attending our Ollie Youth Haven, or engaging in the Pit Stop program. So we sort of weave in and out of their lives a little bit too. And yeah, so it's a long-term ambition and it's a slow burn. I think it's a watch this space in terms of how we better measure the impact that we're having.
In regional Victoria, shared decision-making played out at a very human scale, a community working through some of its most pressing challenges from the ground up. But what does that process look like when you zoom out, when the context shifts from a single community to an entire state? And the challenge isn't a social issue, but natural disasters.
Shared decision making it's very important, and it's really, I guess, the basis upon which the Queensland Reconstruction Authority work, but it's actually the basis upon which Queensland works.
Jake Elwood has a lot of experience with coordination. He spent 3 decades in the Army and is now the CEO of Queensland Reconstruction Authority, or QRA.
So our role is twofold. Firstly, we make sure that the state is more disaster resilient, but we're also responsible for coordinating the recovery in the wake of disasters.
Tonight, severe Category 5 cyclone Yasi slammed into far north Queensland just after midnight. A 50-kilometre stretch of coast between the towns of...
The thing about Queensland is it is the country's most disaster-impacted state. And so The Queensland Reconstruction Authority was formed in 2011 in the wake of Tropical Cyclone Yasi.
The power is out in nearly 180,000 homes tonight, and it may be weeks before it can be reconnected.
And those terrible floods in the south of Queensland.
The highest level the Dawson River at Theodore has reached since the mid-1950s. Some residents have been forced to leave their homes. The water has no respect for domestic chores.
And since that time, you know, at first it was really just about recovery. It was about let's just get everything fixed as it was and move on. But over time, there's been this understanding and this realization that actually we need to make sure that we come out of disasters stronger than when we went into them. So hence resilience has become a really strong theme, as is preparation.
Preparation for QRA means working with all 77 local councils across Queensland to develop individual resilience action plans. Those plans have to account for a lot. Depending on where you are in the state, the threat looks very different. Bushfire, floods, cyclones, and heat waves. Each council is empowered to decide what proactive measures are needed to make them disaster resilient.
For us, the local resilience action plan is that it's a plan that now councils put together with the council and collaborating with their community and all the stakeholders to talk about what their key priorities are. What are the things that will be most impactful in making them resilient?
So can you give me an example then of a shared decision-making process that you've been a part of with the local resilience action plans?
So if we look at out in Thargomindah, it was a prime example last year, very badly impacted by the floods.
Thargomindah is a rural town in southwest Queensland, population of just over 200 people.
And so talking with the mayor, talking with the council and discussing with the community and looking at their history, obviously the levy that they had failed.
When a temporary levy broke, it left 90% of homes and businesses in the town inundated.
In their mind, they wanted to think about how can we make sure we are less prone to inundation, particularly of homes and businesses. The first thing that, as we talked it through, was we'll have to make sure we understand the flood profile risk. So getting a study done, well, that's point one. And then finding out what that mitigation measure would be. And it probably will be a levy that will be designed. So they were very keen about that. And then we had that discussion, though, about levies, and a levy seems simple. A lot of people say, oh, just put up a levy. But levies are complex because they span a community and it can impact different parts of a community in different ways. So then the next step is, okay, so if we think we want a levy, we've got to work with the community and with the council to make sure that everyone understands the why and the how. You know, your intentions may be really good, but if not everyone's bought in, then you can have very different outcomes. There are still some in that community struggling, but they have looked at what they want to achieve, how they're going to be stronger, and I have no doubt that they are going to get there.
There's now funding to start design for a flood levy, a change in how Thargomindah can weather future disasters. It's the kind of long-term protective infrastructure that the preparation process is designed to produce. And the proof that the process works, Jake points to Gympie, a city 90 minutes north of Brisbane.
There's a business in Gympie, and the business it's the first to flood. And so when I went to visit them in 2022, I said, oh boy, I bet you've been out of business for a while. And they said, we're only out of business for 24 hours. And I said, well, how's that possible? I mean, you were completely inundated and you seem to be candidates for being the most impacted. And they said, well, because we know we're going to flood, as soon as it looks like we might flood, we move everything to the high ground. And so as soon as the flood waters are down, they hose out, bring all the stuff down, and they're back in business. I can never stress enough that being ready in itself is probably one of the best forms of resilience, because you might not guess exactly what's going to happen, but you'll take action. You've at least got some agency. If you've done no preparation, you have no agency, and there's a very good chance you'll make a bad decision, and without fault, because of course you can't expect people to make great decisions when they're under massive pressure.
There's a lesson from disaster management for how governments and communities can approach any significant challenge, because the process of preparation, of building shared decision-making into the fabric of a community before a crisis hits, is transferable. The context may change, the process doesn't.
Of all things, disasters should be that moment when we are all bipartisan. There's no point scoring, no bickering. We may have different views about support needed or whatever, but we should all be moving towards the same goal. And I must say, again, in my former life in the military, when things are tough and when the chips are down, I do think the thing about Australians is we love having a shot, having a joke, whatever. But when there's a need, by and large, our culture is, well, we better pick up the tools and help these communities out of tight fix. And then you see communities doing the same for individuals. I think it is a true strength, and you see it time and time again.
I remain pretty hopeful about it because I'm from Queensland. We've got lots of natural disasters, and we do it in disaster time.
As you've just heard, shared decision-making works in a range of different contexts, disaster management being a prime example. It works because there's a clear common goal. What if we had that same vision and commitment across a community for long-term structural issues like poverty or intergenerational disadvantage? Matthew Cox is the Executive Director of the Bryan Foundation. He sees what Queensland has done with disaster management as an opportunity for structural change.
The decision-making structures that we've set up around emergency management are actually really good. So we can do it in a cyclone. We just need to do it in an ongoing way around our social and economic development challenges.
The Bryan Foundation is a philanthropic organisation focused on intergenerational change, looking at how we can improve social and economic outcomes for communities in Australia.
Australia actually has reasonably high levels of poverty and exclusion compared with other developed nations, and we're trying to do something about that. I think the challenge is we've got a set of systems that work for most of us. It's just for about 20% of people it doesn't work, or 20% of communities it doesn't work, and we need to do a different thing in those places.
For the Bryan Foundation, the process is focused on what a particular community needs.
I think it starts with a plan for the social and economic development objectives of a particular community. So it's rooted in a really good plan that responds to local opportunities and local challenges. And then it flows into how that plan gets executed and how money turns into the objectives that are set out in that plan and how money follows that plan.
I guess one of the biggest struggles for philanthropic organisations would be, this idea that they do have to relinquish control a little and, that they do have to surrender to the process, which could be, quite a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, well, it's a shift from your board making detailed decisions about how your resources are applied and sharing those decisions with others. And that doesn't mean total hands-off. It just means a sharing of decision-making with local people and with government parties, not without parameters, not without oversight. That can all remain. But it does mean that you've got to go from being the only people who make the decision to being one of a group of people that make a decision. That's actually not a very hard shift, but it is a shift.
Philanthropy has a certain freedom. It can listen to community, back what it hears, and then fund accordingly.
We can try things, we can make it easier, we can pay for things that in the beginning are hard for the public sector to pay for lots of good reasons. So I think we've got a really important seeding role. We can sort of lubricate the friction points a little bit in these processes, and that's a valuable role.
But Matthew says if we want shared decision-making at scale, we can't rely on philanthropy alone. Governments need to be part of the process, and that means doing the work of building the structures, the accountability frameworks, and the trust that makes shared decision-making possible.
There's some really simple starting points. A lot of communities have got a terrific plan. They're trying to move forward on a social and economic development agenda for their community. So I think getting all those plans on the table, seeing what the objectives are, which ones are common across many communities, which ones are different, and then starting to work in an organised way to bring government resources in behind those plans. At a more systemic level, there's work to do around how shared decision-making models sit with probity concerns and procurement and other very real constraints that governments have. And then I think looking at setting up more of the local decision-making structures in local communities. So they're the longer-term things, but we could start by putting all the plans on the table that communities have already developed and worked out how we can back those in an organised way.
Do you think that as evidence grows for shared decision-making, the stronger the case becomes for incorporating it as a more effective way of working together?
Yeah, well, I think the case is proved in the alternative. What's the counterfactual case? That continuing as we are is a good idea. That's the counterfactual. And, palpably, we haven't shifted over 20 or 30 years, the things that we care about in the places that we're talking about. So we have to try another way. And I think that implies two things. It implies a much more holistic understanding of success in a community. So rather than measuring pass or fail on a very particular service or activity or investment, we've got to look at a portfolio of investments over time and seeing if underlying conditions in communities are getting better. So there's a much more holistic sense of progress and success that's required. And it's also inherently longer term. If we're interested in intergenerational change, we just need to get over this sort of silly idea that in 2 or 3 years you'll have the big results rolling in. What you will have is early signs of success. You will have things that science and experience tell us typically lead to big results down the track. You will get those things in 2, 3, 5 years. But if you want a totally transformed local economy, if you want a totally transformed local population in terms of employment and levels of education, things like that, then that's going to take 15 to 25 years. Community insights and leadership are incredibly important, as we've been talking about, but they're not actually the only form of leadership and knowledge that you want. You want all of those sources. So is it humility or is it just a bloody obvious way to work?
You preach it to the choir, Matthew.
Yeah. I think it's probably bloody obvious. Agency is just important for change. Any of us, all of us, in any context. If we're involved, if we feel respected, if we feel we've got a place in the change or the community or the system that we're talking about, then we respond in a way that activates all of our capacities.
3 very different organisations, 3 very different contexts, but a common thread running through all of them. That shared decision-making isn't a single moment or a single meeting. It's a process, one that, when done well, keeps drawing on the real strength and perspectives of community. Thanks to Amy Robinson, Jake Elwood and Matthew Cox for their time. This is Making Place Matter. Series 1 is about who decides. I'm Brooke Boney. Follow Making Place Matter in your favourite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. You can also head to placeaustralia.org for more resources. Making Place Matter is a podcast from Partnerships for Local Action and Community Empowerment. This series, Who Decides, is produced by Dead Set Studios.